Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we're heading back to the Lone Star State, where the sunsets bleed red, the wind never stops howling, and the past refuses to stay buried. Texas is known for wide-open skies, proud traditions, and southern hospitality. But look a little closer, and you'll find something else, something darker. These aren't urban legends. These are real, documented, and disturbingly true stories, passed down, whispered about, and in some cases experienced by people who were never the same again. From ghost towns swallowed by silence, to cursed lakes where the dead don't rest, to things older than Texas itself. These are the 10 most disturbing true horror stories from deep within Texas. But first, most viewers make one critical mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the kind of stories that crawl into your head and stay there. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the night's just getting started. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and your current time in the comments. Because here at Creepy Vibes, the clock doesn't tick forward, it ticks down. Now, turn off the lights, put your phone on Do Not Disturb, and let's dive into the darkness. Though I am now far from the man I once was, though my thoughts flutter like wounded moths against the inner walls of a mind stretched to the limits of comprehension, I must begin this account with honesty. I chose to walk that path. I chose to follow the light. The year was 1997, and I had recently returned to my home in New Orleans after completing a manuscript on ancient European burial rites when I received a parcel from my former colleague, Emery Gade, a surveyor by trade, a fringe researcher by obsession. We had corresponded many times over the years on regional folklore, from the loup-garou of the Louisiana swamps to the skinwalkers of northern Arizona. But this letter was different. Inside the weathered manila envelope was a brief letter, written in a hand so shaky it resembled the frantic scratchings of a dying man. "Jonathan, I've found it. The light, the one from the stories. It's not a ghost. It is something older, something watching. I cannot explain it yet, but I have seen it, and I know now that this road isn't haunted. It's hollow. I will return to the site tonight. If you don't hear from me again, it means I've gone too far. E." Enclosed was a single Polaroid, grainy, dark. At the center of the frame, suspended above what looked like an old railroad path, hovered a pale, spherical light, dim and unnatural, unlike any headlamp, lantern, or flashlight. This thing didn't glow, it merely was, like a dead star reawakened, and surrounding it the trees appeared, bent, recoiled almost, as if they feared what was standing at the center of their ancient grove. I arrived in Saratoga, Texas, a small, quiet town at the edge of the Big Thicket National Preserve, just 4 days after receiving Emery's letter. The townspeople were polite but guarded. Something about my questions, particularly those involving Bragg Road, made them shut down. One gas station attendant, a withered man with skin like tanned leather, muttered, "Folks see things out there. They always have. Lights, screams, sometimes shadows that move wrong. It's the land, mister. You don't want to be looked at too hard." I found Emery's rental car parked in the lot of an old ranger station, keys still inside. There was no sign of him. The local police had filed a missing person report, but they'd stopped searching 2 days prior. "People get lost in the thicket all the time," they told me. They didn't believe that. They were afraid to believe anything else. I entered Bragg Road at twilight on October 8th. The air was thick with humidity, though no clouds filled the sky. Not a single bird, insect, or even rustle of leaves could be heard. The silence was not natural. It was imposed, like a great breath held in the lungs of something unseen. As I moved deeper into the trail, a sensation crept over me, like walking beneath an invisible archway. A threshold. I could feel it in my skin, a subtle pressure in the ears, a hum just beneath hearing, as though the very atoms of the place vibrated at a foreign frequency. And then it came. As I moved deeper into the trail, a sensation crept over me like walking beneath an invisible archway, a threshold. I could feel it in my skin, a subtle pressure in the ears, a hum just beneath hearing, as though the very atoms of the place vibrated at a foreign frequency. And then it came. At precisely 8:46 p.m., the light appeared. It hovered perhaps 30 feet ahead, bobbing gently, its pale glow casting no shadows, no reflections. It wasn't a beam or a burst. It was a presence. It floated across the path slowly, like it was waiting for me to follow, and I did. As I walked deeper into the woods, following the light as it weaved between the broken railroad timbers, I began to hear whispers. Not words exactly, but the echo of words in a language that my mind could not translate. Thoughts that weren't mine stirred in my head. Fragments of images, geometries that could not exist. Skies that boiled with colorless fire. My flashlight dimmed, then sputtered out entirely. The orb stopped, and from behind it, a form began to coalesce. It did not walk, it did not emerge. It simply became visible like fog revealing the shape of a mountain. It stood 20, maybe 25 feet tall, though to speak in feet is folly, for its form was not built for this world. It was an aberration composed of roiling limbs that bent backward and forward simultaneously, covered in pulsing skin that shimmered like oil under moonlight. Where a face should have been, there was only a gaping hole, a void that seemed to draw in light, sound, thought. Then it turned. It had no eyes, and yet I knew I was seen. I was not looking at it, I was looking into it, and something within that chasm looked back. I fell to my knees. My limbs refused to obey. My heart pounded with the rhythm of an ancient drum, summoning something from below the surface of reason. At my feet lay Emery's notebook, tattered, waterlogged, and burned around the edges. I flipped through its pages, the ink smeared and trembling. The last entry read, "It's not the light. The light is the lure. The light is the doorbell, the one who answers. It doesn't speak, it absorbs." I looked up. The light was gone. So was the creature. But the air still buzzed, the soil still throbbed beneath me. I turned and fled. As I stumbled through the thick brush, the world around me seemed to stretch, collapse, invert. Paths led nowhere. Trees changed positions. Bragg Road had changed. It would not let me go without a price. I emerged into the parking lot just after sunrise. My clothing was torn. My hands were stained with a dark green-black fluid that evaporated within hours. Rangers found me and assumed exposure or dehydration. I let them believe it. Later, I developed the film inside Emery's old camera. There were 23 photos. Most were of trees, darkness, motion blur. But the final photo, taken, I suspect, just before Emery vanished, showed something no lens should ever have captured. It was a silhouette, towering, tentacled, eyeless. Behind it, hundreds more, waiting. The light had opened a window, and what I saw that night was only the first to peer through. Bragg Road is not haunted by the soul of a railroad worker. That lie was invented to contain the truth, to soothe it, to hide it. The light is not a spirit, not a ghost. It is a signal sent from the outside, an ancient rift, a thinning of dimensions where the laws of reality crumble like wet parchment. Those who see the light are seen in return. Those who follow it open the door wider, and soon I fear that door will no longer close. In the decaying archives of municipal records where faded ink barely clings to time-worn parchment, there are still references, half ignored and hastily crossed out, to a structure known unofficially as the Screaming Bridge. It lies hidden at the edge of River Legacy Park in Arlington, Texas. The maps no longer mark its path, and the city pretends it is no longer there. But the screams have never stopped. I write this not to entertain nor to amuse, but as a final act of warning. My name is Dr. Caleb Morin, formerly of the Department of Archaeolinguistics at Miskatonic University. My work in deciphering extinct proto-languages led me to study pre-Akkadian rituals of burial and sacrifice, and it is precisely that esoteric specialty that drew me, with the subtle gravity of a nightmare, to the bridge. The official story is well documented. On a damp November night in 1961, a group of 6 high school students, celebrating the euphoric recklessness of youth, careened through the park in a borrowed car. Laughter turned to terror as the tires slipped on wet concrete. The vehicle breached the fractured barrier and plunged into the creek below. All 6 were killed instantly, but according to multiple surviving witnesses, the screaming continued long after the impact. Not the desperate cries of survivors, but something deeper, unnatural, a sound so inhuman that it left one bystander hospitalized for a week, trembling and mute, unable to speak of what she'd heard, except to say, it wasn't them screaming, it was something beneath them. I visited the bridge in late autumn of 2010, accompanied by 3 graduate students and a local guide named Whitaker, a man whose sun-wrinkled face betrayed years of seeing more than he wished. The bridge itself was easy to miss. Half covered in moss and nearly hidden by overgrowth, its concrete slabs cracked like bones long buried. As we approached, a sudden stillness seized the air. Even the ever-present hum of Texas insects had ceased. The silence had weight. Whitaker muttered something, barely audible. "It listens when you speak too loud." One of the students, Julia, laughed nervously. "Who listens?" He didn't answer. At precisely 11:23 p.m., as our equipment captured only static, we saw the first figures emerge. From the far side of the bridge, a ghostly car, luminous and insubstantial, appeared. It rolled forward silently, its headlights casting no beam, its wheels turning over nothing. Inside were figures, blurred, frozen in a moment of mirth, hands raised, mouths wide in laughter, and then, without transition, it shifted. Their faces twisted, their eyes widened. The spectral car slid sideways and plunged over the edge. There was no crash, only screams, endless, rising, not human. Julia collapsed, nosebleed convulsing. She began muttering words in a tongue I recognized from my studies but had never taught her. Urduru ulnamu, Tahekal maru nindul, pre-Sumerian. Do not awaken the one below. It dreams in meat. It remembers its name. That night, as the others tended to Julia, I returned to the creek bed alone. The water ran shallow in the moonlight. The spot where the car had landed in 1961 was marked by erosion and the faint blackening of soil, something burned, not merely broken. I unearthed a stone, smooth and perfectly round, not worn by water but carved. Symbols encircled its surface, impossible, shifting even as I stared. My vision tunneled. A sound, like thousands of insects screaming in reverse, filled my ears, and then I heard it. Not the scream of the dead, the scream of the imprisoned, a voice layered with the weight of centuries. They broke the seal. Flesh awoke me. You are the herald. I dropped the stone, but its imprint remains on my hand even now, like a birthmark that never belonged to me. Psychics and mediums brought to the bridge in the years after have experienced seizures, possession, and sudden bouts of xenoglossy, speaking in languages extinct for over 5,000 years. One man began speaking in Proto-Elamitic script, naming a god never recorded in any scripture. Eok Sarthul, the throat beneath, the sleeper in stone. They say the bridge was built atop an older structure, one dating back to an era when no known civilization could have existed in Texas. The ancient foundation beneath the creek matches no geological formation, composed of stone quarried from no earthly location. Some claim the high schoolers' crash wasn't an accident, that their tires were pushed, that something called to them through the laughter, through the night, and they answered. I have since abandoned my research. My students are gone. Julia remains institutionalized, blind, and nearly mute, though she writes the same 3 words over and over. It remembers names. I do not sleep. When I close my eyes, I see the bridge, not as it is now, but as it was, covered in carvings, ringed with torches, and surrounded by worshippers in skins not their own. The screams do not stop, and now I believe they never came from above. They came from below, from the thing that the bridge covers like a scab. Not a haunting, not a curse, but a containment. And the cracks are widening. I do not ask you to believe what I am about to recount, for belief is the luxury of the sane, and my tale will drag the reader far beyond the tattered boundaries of what man calls rational. I offer instead only a record, an account, a series of events so dreadful, so steeped in ancestral terror and unnatural pattern, that even the most sober-minded man must pause, if only to feel the hairs rise unbidden along his neck. It began, publicly at least, in August of 1969 on the shores of Lake Worth, Texas, but its roots stretch back further, into the soft, rotten soil of forgotten rites and older, hungrier things. The newspapers first treated it as a joke. Lake Worth monster hurls tire at teens, one headline chortled. Sketches of the creature appeared beside articles about Elvis and the moon landing. It was described as half-man, half-goat, with white fur matted across a hulking, humanoid frame. But there were inconsistencies, anomalies few noticed. One report spoke of scales beneath the fur. Another mentioned a stench like rotting copper, so foul that the air itself shimmered. The lovers who first reported the creature were dismissed, though their story never changed. They parked near the old Fort Worth Nature Center, and just after midnight, something stepped from the woods. It did not charge. It watched. Then, without warning, it hurled a truck tire at them effortlessly, a gesture not of animal aggression, but of testing, of demonstration, of play. Most laughed, but I did not, for I had seen the crescent-shaped livestock killings in 1962, the mutilations never explained, the precise removal of organs with surgical precision no knife could match. The wounds were not cauterized, they were blackened, drained. In my research, while scouring the journals of early 20th century Texas settlers, I found a diary belonging to a man named Jebediah Marnes, dated 1902. His final entries were erratic, scrawled in red ink and filled with dire warnings. The demon walks again, horned and hungering. The boy who fed it has vanished. No trace but cloven prints. I hear it in the trees. It asks me things. I cross-referenced the symbols found in his drawings with my own studies of forgotten Appalachian cults and Mesopotamian soil sigils. The match was unnervingly precise. Perhaps the most disturbing part of my investigation came in the form of a personal account, sent to me by a relative of a young woman named Margaret Bell, who lived near the lake in 1969. Margaret was not an occultist, not a scientist. She was a school teacher, but she began to dream. She wrote nightly of a being cloaked in hair and shadow, tall enough to blot out the moonlight, with no eyes, only holes, endless and yawning like tunnels bored into the soul. It whispered, not in English, but in a language older than thought. And in those dreams, it learned. It doesn't eat, she wrote. It learns, through pain, my pain, others. It is building something, or maybe remembering it. Her final entry ended mid-sentence. The next day, Margaret was gone, her home untouched, her bed undisturbed, but on the porch, embedded in concrete as though pressed by an inhuman weight, was a single hoofprint. Cloven. Impossibly deep. Local law enforcement eventually closed the case. No foul play, they claimed, but I had begun to receive letters, anonymous and unsigned, referencing a ritual circle buried beneath Lake Worth, constructed not by modern hands but unearthed, disturbed during the construction of nearby infrastructure. According to one of the notes, the thing they call Goatman is not the beast, it is the face, the interpreter, the voice of what lies beneath. A cult once dormant had returned, known only by the initials OSC, Order of the Sable Crook. Farmers and ranchers once spoke of them in hushed tones, hooded men gathering near blighted trees, burning sigils into livestock, drawing crescents in blood. I found one such location myself, hidden beneath overgrown brush, a stone altar scarred by ancient carvings. At its center, a hollow, a hole, not naturally formed but chiseled, fed. No bottom could be seen even with light. When I leaned close, I heard it, a voice, not in words but in meanings, a pulse like breath, a question. What would you give to understand? The Goatman was sighted again in 1985, then in 1997, each time near water, each time preceded by nightmares spreading among locals like a sickness of thought. It does not kill indiscriminately, it chooses, it probes, it rehearses something. Some now believe the creature is only a manifestation, a puppet for a deeper intelligence, a mask worn by what Margaret Bell described as a god with no face and too many mouths. And I believe her. I see it in dreams now, too. It stands in the woods of my mind, hooved, tall, watching. It does not move. It does not speak. It waits. Because something was awakened at Lake Worth. Something put to sleep in the days before memory. And though we call it Goatman and laugh at the name, it is merely the first to rise. Among the limestone ridges of central Texas, between the towns of Wimberley and Blanco, runs a jagged spine of hills so twisted and time-worn that even nature seems reluctant to claim them. The locals call it the Devil's Backbone, not in jest, but in grim reverence, whispered, never declared. I had heard of this place in scattered mentions, in footnotes of regional folklore, in dismissed reports from surveyors, and in a yellowing letter from a retired cartographer who concluded his last correspondence with one line, "The hills here do not rise, they coil." It was curiosity that brought me to the backbone, but it was terror, and terror alone, that made me flee. The landscape itself bears no illusions of comfort. The terrain is harsh, the rock formations jagged and unnaturally symmetrical, as though shaped by an intelligence that mimicked mountains but had never truly seen one. Trees grow in warped spirals, leaning away from the ridge as if seeking escape. Even animals act strangely near the backbone. Ranchers have long noted their herds avoid it entirely, turning back from invisible boundaries with a terror more ancient than instinct. Coyotes refuse to howl near it. Birds fall silent, insects vanish, and yet the land is not quiet. At night, there are hoofbeats. The first night I spent on the backbone, I set camp by the remnants of a collapsed homestead, a place abandoned, I later learned, in 1891 after its owner was found disemboweled, his skin turned inside out as though something had tried to wear it in confusion. I was awoken at 2:14 a.m. by the sound of galloping hooves. No one rides out there, not anymore. When I emerged from my tent, I saw them, phantom horsemen, their eyes hollow, their uniforms from eras long lost, Civil War coats, Comanche War paint. Some wore no faces at all. Their steeds were eyeless things, skeletal but moving with impossible vitality. They rode along the ridge in utter silence, except for one who screamed, not in pain, in something deeper, a scream of remembrance. In my research, I found the account of the Valderas family who purchased a ranch near the Backbone in 1983. They lasted 6 weeks. The father reported waking to the smell of sulfur, a choking stench that clung to clothes, skin, even breath. Their barn had been clawed, not torn, not scratched, but burned with fingerprints, black handprints seared into the wood. Not human, 3-fingered, elongated, curved unnaturally inward, like the hands of something that crawled more often than it stood upright. They fled in the night, leaving everything behind. When authorities investigated days later, the air in the barn remained unbreathable. It was an amateur historian, one Micah Goolsby, who found the cave, tucked beneath an overhang, unreachable without crawling on hands and knees through a tunnel of roots and rock. He never revealed its exact location, only what he saw inside, carvings, thousands, prehistoric yet impossibly detailed. They depicted many-limbed beings, hunched and insectile, devouring human figures in scenes of ritual and dissection. One panel showed men offering organs to a towering, antlered entity whose head was a tangle of mouths. Micah sent me sketches before his disappearance. I compared them to the forbidden plates of the Codex Doloth, a collection of Lovian rites said to have originated before the Younger Dryas. The symbols matched. Micah's final note read, "These were not gods, they were keepers. The Backbone is not a ridge, it's a lid." The oldest graveyard in the region lies just south of the Backbone, untouched by development, ringed in blackthorn and always in shadow. The stones there bear names, but many are not English, nor Latin, nor of any known language. Some are spirals, others appear as sigils, curves and hooks that twist the eye when stared at too long. One stone bears no mark at all, but the grass before it never grows, and dogs refuse to walk near it. Locals say strange men in wide hats come at dusk and leave offerings, bones, jars of blood, teeth. No one sees them arrive, no one sees them leave, but always the offerings vanish. On my last night near the Backbone, I dreamt I was inside the hills, not above, but within, crawling through fleshy tunnels that pulsed and sighed. I saw the carvings again, but this time they moved, they bled. I saw men dragged into pits, their minds peeled like fruit. I saw the Watcher, a thing with no form but all eyes, stretching across the limestone like a tumor of thought. And in that dream, I understood. The horsemen, the ghosts, the screams, they are echoes. The real thing sleeps beneath, bound perhaps, but weakening. Every sighting, every scream is a ripple, an echo of a mind too vast to be contained by stone. The devil's backbone is no spine of earth. It is the vertebrae of something that is not yet dead. I left hill country before dawn. I do not speak of this place to others. Those who know already fear. Those who don't must not. I still hear hoofbeats some nights when I'm far from Texas. The sulfur returns in my dreams. The handprints sometimes appear on my walls, inside the house. And when I wake, I smell dust and the dry, hot scent of breath through ancient nostrils. The devil's backbone waits, and it remembers. There are structures which defy their blueprints, places whose geometry, though physically sound, twist the mind and bend perception. Houses that should not exist, but do, like tumors on the flesh of the earth, growing in defiance of nature's laws. One such place stands, or perhaps waits, in the outer suburbs of Houston, Texas. It has no official name, no address easily found, but among those who study forbidden things architects of the abnormal, cartographers of the esoteric. It is spoken of in whispers as the Houston Horror House. The events of 2011 were not the beginning, but rather an eruption, like a boil finally bursting, revealing rot long festering beneath a pristine surface. It began subtly. The family, a couple in their late 30s and their 2 children, had moved into the newly renovated property in April of that year. The house was sleek, modern, and nestled within one of Houston's more affluent and quiet neighborhoods. Nothing in its design bespoke menace, and yet, within weeks, the smells began, not constant but invasive, fleeting like a breath against the back of the neck, sulfur, hot and sharp, then rot, a smell not of decay but of age, of memory made meat. It emanated from nowhere and everywhere, beneath tiles, between vents, and later, from mirrors. The mother reported that her cosmetics melted even when untouched. The kitchen faucets ran black for an hour one night, before returning to normal as if nothing had happened. They called a plumber, an electrician. Nothing explained it. Then came the scratching. At first it was in the walls, tiny, rhythmic, not unlike mice. Then beneath the floorboards. Then within the wooden beams of the children's bunk bed. The youngest child, only 5, began waking in the night, claiming to hear someone drawing shapes in the floor. He said it sounded like fingernails, long ones, curved. He began to draw crude sketches at first, then more detailed, too detailed for his age, always of the same figure, tall, robed, featureless, a humanoid shape with no mouth, its face a smooth void, not blank but impossibly blank, like a hole cut into space. When asked who it was, he whispered, "He listens through the glass." The parents found mirrors fogged without cause, messages written on them, hundreds appearing overnight, not in English, not in any human language, but the child could read them. The family brought in priests, 2 Roman Catholic, 1 Greek Orthodox. None lasted more than a few hours. The first priest grew violently ill, vomiting blood and speaking in broken Aramaic. The second refused to enter the upstairs hallway. The third, upon hearing the child's account, muttered only, "This is not a haunting. This is a host." Paranormal investigators followed. They brought instruments, cameras, audio recorders. One device, designed to record infrasound, captured 74 minutes of what sounded like whispering. A multitude of voices speaking simultaneously, some in ancient tongues, others in harsh static, but one phrase repeated in nearly every voice, "We see you." He waits beneath. They fled before nightfall. The house was vacated, left in silence. But curiosity, foul, irresistible, knows no boundary. A new family moved in that December, a man and his wife, childless, skeptics by nature. They lasted 6 days. The man, formerly an engineer, was found standing in the driveway staring at the lawn. When asked why they were leaving, he answered only, "I saw my reflection blink." He refused further questions. He left his job. No one has seen him since. In piecing together this horror, I found clues buried in the city's ignored history. The land upon which the house was built sits at a convergence of ley lines, subtle threads of energy that intersect only in places where the veil between realms wears thin. A cult unnamed in records but hinted at in hospital reports and missing person cases from 1971 had once occupied the area. They practiced summoning rituals, not of spirits or demons, but of concepts, entities from outside our frame of reality. They left behind symbols beneath the concrete, circles that never closed, triangles that bent inward. One mark, when drawn accurately, causes nausea in the observer. They called their god Ul-Hatha, translated loosely from the surviving fragments as the listener who has no face, no voice, but all understanding. The house has not been torn down. Realtors list it with fake images. They change its address in online databases, but it remains, watching, waiting, There are rumors of construction workers fleeing after finding bones fused to the foundation, of walls that bleed only under moonlight, of smart devices picking up voices in the static that say, "You are home now." None stay. Some have tried to burn it. The fire refused to catch. I have acquired one of the child's drawings. I do not display it. I have sealed it in a lid box and buried it 5 miles from my residence. Sometimes I still dream of the man with no mouth. He stands at the foot of my bed, silent, patient. But it's not his face that terrifies me. It's what I hear inside my mind when I look away. "We see you." He waits beneath, and I fear. He waits for me. I do not write this to be believed. I write only because the act of setting these words to paper may slow the screaming in my head and dull the visions that return each time I close my eyes. The Texas sun burns outside my window, yet I shiver still, for I have seen something no man was meant to witness, and though I have since fled the region of Palo Duro Canyon, I feel no escape. The weight of what lies beneath those ochre cliffs still presses upon my soul. In the summer of 1987, a geological survey team from Austin State University vanished while charting fault lines within the lesser-known ridges of Palo Duro. Their disappearance was quietly buried by the authorities. No press, no public statement. I only learned of it through my late uncle, Dr. Russell Mathers, a folklorist with a fascination for Texas tribal lore. He'd received a package days before his own disappearance, a journal soaked and warped, allegedly found beside a spring-fed creek at the canyon's base. It was written in a frenzied, near-incoherent scrawl, pages torn and stained with something darker than water. The author, a geologist named Edgar Pell, spoke of descending into a cave beyond any charted map, of seeing walls carved with symbols older than humanity, and of something vast and slithering whose tendrils mimicked the desperate reach of drowning men. The final legible entry: "It watches, it waits, it remembers. The chains were never meant to last." Obsessed, I followed the clues hidden within Edgar's journal. The locals would not speak of the place directly. A few old Comanche families in the nearby town of Kenyon, Texas, crossed themselves when I asked about caves sealed with iron bars. One elderly woman whispered, "The blood sun rose once. We pray it will never rise again." After months of research and bribery, I located a faded 1874 Army report referencing an incident involving a Comanche spiritual leader and a unit of U.S. soldiers gone mad in a narrow gorge northeast of the canyon's floor. A cave had been sealed afterward with heavy iron and Christian prayer. The implication chilled me, and so I went. I brought only a flashlight, a canteen, and a recorder. My notes from that journey remain with the authorities, but I recall it with painful clarity. The path wound between red cliffs that narrowed until even the wind seemed hesitant to enter. Eventually, I found it. A jagged opening, no wider than a man's shoulders, barred with rusted iron. The air around it was still, dead, and yet I could feel something breathing within. Not with lungs, no, it was the breathing of presence, of a watching intelligence. I pried the bars apart. With each creaking inch, a sound echoed up from within, a chime like bone against stone. The moment I stepped into the cave, I felt my body pulled forward like a puppet to its strings. The walls were not natural stone. They pulsed with a texture like flesh turned to fossil, engraved with glyphs that swam and shifted when I stared too long. My flashlight flickered, not from battery failure, something else, as though light itself resisted being here. Then I heard it, not a growl, not a hiss. It was a wet slither, a dragging sound that went on and on, echoing up from deeper than the earth should allow. My mouth went dry, my ears rang, and I ran, though the tunnel seemed to stretch longer with every step. As I turned to flee, the beam of my flashlight caught a glimpse, just a glimpse, of something wrong, a shape too large to live, too alien to name. Its form was glossy and slick, covered in veined flesh the color of bruises. Its tendrils, yes, human-like arms, dozens of them, reaching in the dark, twitched as though it sensed my fear. But its eyes, God help me, its eyes were human, scattered across its face like broken relics. Some were wide with madness, others wept blood, and one, I swear, one was mine. I awoke outside the cave mouth at dawn, my arms scraped, my canteen drained. The bars were resealed, though I carried no tools, and the journal was gone. I left Palo Duro in silence, though sometimes I dream of that vast, hidden room, deep underground where the creature sleeps, or waits, or remembers. Since then, I've noticed patterns in ancient Comanche songs, in the layout of early Spanish churches built near the canyon's rim, as if every generation since the blood eclipse has known something dwells beneath and tried to contain it. I've mapped the earthquakes in that area since 1987. They grow stronger, they grow closer to the surface. One day it will break free, and I think it remembers my scent. I had long considered myself immune to superstition. A lifetime in academia does that. It chisels the soul until belief gives way to data, and awe is replaced by footnotes. But that was before I took a research trip to Pecos, Texas, in search of forgotten missions from the Spanish colonial era, before I heard the hum, before I stood among the graves of that God-forsaken cemetery and understood, if only for a moment, what it means to feel the weight of an ancient eternal evil. The graveyard wasn't on any modern map. A crooked iron gate half buried in mesquite led me to it, a scattering of crumbling headstones choked by weeds and silence. The locals gave it no name, only referring to it with an unspoken gesture, a subtle nod followed by a look toward the horizon. It lay 5 miles east of town, down an unpaved road, hidden by a veil of dust and apathy. It was there, standing among the stones at twilight, that I first heard it, a low, undulating hum, not quite music, not quite voice, but something in between. It came from beneath the ground, not loud, not overt, but insistent, a presence, a call. I told myself it was wind slipping through stone. But it wasn't. According to scattered church records, a Spanish mission known as San Esteban del Lamento was founded near Pecos in 1699 and vanished without record by 1701. Every friar, every convert, every soul simply disappeared. The few pages of a surviving ledger mention a night when the sky turned red and the ground sang with the voices of the buried. That phrase chilled me more than I admitted at the time. Worse still was the tale of Father Alonso Martel, a traveling priest from Mexico City who visited Pecos in 1936. Locals remember him as kind, gentle, and utterly transfixed by the cemetery. He stayed at the church rectory for just 2 nights. On the second night, he took a recording device to the graveyard. On the third, he cut his own throat in the rectory's bathtub. His final journal entry, preserved by the diocese and kept in a locked cabinet, read, "They are not dead. They only sleep until the blood moon wakes their song." Fascinated, or perhaps already under its influence, I returned to the graveyard night after night. Each evening as dusk settled, the humming began. The pitch was too structured for nature and yet too chaotic for human origin, a music that seeped into the mind more than the ears. I began dreaming in Latin, a language I barely understood, and waking with the taste of earth in my mouth. On the night of the blood moon, I returned again. The sky was rust red. The grave shimmered faintly, as though something beneath the soil stirred. The humming rose in pitch, no longer a drone but a choir, layered and resonant. I recognized fragments of the Dies Irae, but twisted, backward, inverted somehow. There were no instruments, no people, only that great unseen chorus rising in perfect unnatural harmony. Then I saw them. The graves did not open. No. Instead, the stone markers trembled, and from their bases emerged shapes, not corpses, not spirits, impressions of the dead, as if time itself remembered them and cast their forms in shadow. They were faceless, yet mournful, transparent yet bound to the soil by some ancient curse. And they sang, "God help me," they sang in Latin, their mouths moving to words older than Rome, older than Christ. Words that spoke of resurrection, not of body, but of will. A force bound in song, buried in silence and reawakened under the blood moon. I fled when I realized they were not singing to the sky. They were summoning something beneath. Before I left town, I returned to the graveyard one last time. I brought salt, crosses, all the things we cling to when facing the unknown. Useless. There, half buried near the center, I found a broken bell, cracked in two, yet strangely warm. Around its base, the earth had blackened, scorched, as if something had once tried to burst from below, held back only by that bell and whatever right once bound it. It is my belief that San Esteban del Lamento was not destroyed, not by Comanche raids, not by disease, but by what they awakened beneath their mission. The cemetery is not a burial ground. It is a seal, and on nights when the moon runs red, it weakens. I no longer study history. I no longer sleep without pills. Sometimes in the dead hours of night, I still hear it, that distant hum just under the floorboards, and I know somewhere beneath that cursed soil, outside Pecos, they are still singing. There are places on this earth where the crust of reality wears thin, where ancient things press up from the depths with dreams older than bones. One such place is the Devil's Sinkhole, a yawning vertical chasm that gouges the limestone wilds of Edwards County like an unhealed wound. Tourists know it as a bat cave. Locals, if they speak of it at all, refer to it only with downcast eyes and quick prayers. But I know what truly lies beneath. I know what he found, and I know what took him. Dr. Edgar V. Thorne was not a man given to wild speculation. He was a dry, stubborn academic from Boston with more degrees than charm, who came to Texas in 1984 after a series of fossilized femurs were discovered near the sinkhole's rim. He believed he'd stumbled upon a long-lost Pleistocene burial site, perhaps the missing link in North America's hominid lineage. His notes began, at first, with professional enthusiasm, the typical dry logs of bone structure, sediment dating, carbon analysis. But quickly, things took a turn. He recorded finding crania with double rows of teeth, each interlocking like a shark's jaw. The orbital cavities were elongated, slanted, as if adapted for seeing in pitch blackness. The spinal columns twisted with vertebrae unlike any catalogued creature. Not human, not ape, not even mammalian. Pre-sapiens, possibly pre-Anthropocene, he wrote. Then, more troubling, post-human, degenerate lineage, number not of Earth, never of Earth. Thorne attempted to send a preliminary paper to the Texas Natural Science Museum in Austin. He included several fossil samples for authentication. They never arrived. Instead, that very night, the museum's archival basement caught fire. Official reports cited an electrical fault, but witnesses described a sound, a wet, clicking hiss, like something crawling through air ducts. The janitor was never found. Thorne was devastated. In his final letters, mailed to his sister in Maine and intercepted by the Historical Society, his writing became erratic, shifting between classical Latin, Akkadian cuneiform, which he could not have known, and drawings of spirals, concentric rings, and eyes. Always eyes. The town of Rock Springs claimed he checked out of his motel on April 2nd, 1985. He never arrived at the university. He was never seen again. Only one thing was recovered from the Devil's Sinkhole, a field tent, its walls ripped open from the inside, and on a nearby limestone outcrop, dozens of deep, frantic scratches as if made by fingernails or bone. It still has eyes, it still has eyes, it sees in the stone, it watches the sky and remembers how to climb. The Comanche avoided the sinkhole. They called it Tam-hi-yo, mouth of the sleeping gods. They said the wind that rose from its pit was not wind at all, but breath, and that the bat swarms each dusk were not animals, but the decoys of something else, something that used them like camouflage. Locals whisper that the fossils Thorne unearthed weren't fossils at all, merely the shed carapaces of things that go into slumber for eons, not dead, not even dormant, merely watching. They say the double teeth weren't for chewing. They were for shearing flesh underwater, in the dark, in pressure far beyond human comprehension. And when the blood moon rises over Edwards County, some say the wind from the sinkhole sings, low and mournful, like teeth grinding behind stone. I visited the site last year. I should not have. I found no bones, no tent. But in the shadows beneath the cave's lip, where the sun never reaches, I saw something move, slow and deliberate, something that slid rather than walked, something that had not forgotten it once ruled a different sky. I brought back a stone from the rim, gray and laced with ancient minerals. Since then, I've not slept. I hear whispers in the hum of my refrigerator. I see teeth in the drain when I shower. And in my dreams, oh God, the dreams, I see a face, round and pale, covered in bone-plated eyes rising from black water inch by inch. And it smiles. I write these words not for fame nor posterity, but in the vain hope that some future mind might comprehend what the human spirit cannot endure. What I witnessed among the sun-choked ruins of Terlingua, Texas, shattered the tenuous veil between reason and madness. My fingers tremble even now, and I fear that before this night ends, I shall add my voice to the silent choir of those who saw, who knew, and who were taken. It began, as most blasphemies do, with curiosity. Terlingua, a whispering name on old maps, half swallowed by dust and neglect, lies on the edge of Big Bend, where jagged rocks split the earth like burst veins. In the late 1800s, it thrived for a time, extracting cinnabar and mercury from the bones of the land. But the mines bled dry, the soil soured, and the wind returned, not empty but carrying things. What remains is a skeletal town, sun-bleached shacks, splintered church pews, a few crumbling graves. They call it a ghost town. But what haunts Terlingua is not dead. I had come seeking the remnants of Jonah Harwood, a prospector turned mystic whose journals had recently surfaced in an estate sale in Austin. His ravings, fevered, incoherent, spoke of lights that moved with thought, of doors that opened not with hinges but geometry, and of a voice older than the soil, whispering secrets beneath the hills. His final entry: I have seen the things that crawl where the sky folds. The light is not light, it is flesh, it is memory, it is coming back. I was not the first to seek Harwood, but I fear I may be the last to return. It took me 2 days by foot and mule to reach the site, a slumping wooden shack held together with rusted iron chains, padlocked in 4 places, every crack and seam sealed with black tar. The boards were etched with symbols that twisted the eyes to behold, shapes that could not exist in Euclidean space, and yet were there, burned into the wood like brands. At night, something throbbed inside it, a pulsing violet glow, like light filtered through spoiled milk, leaked from beneath the warped floorboards. I camped nearby, unable to approach. not from fear, but a pressure in the air, like the weight of a storm or the breath of something immense. That night, I dreamed of a door opening in the sky, not like a portal but a wound. From it spilled coiling limbs, slick and hairless, jointed at wrong angles, ending in hands that were not hands. They did not walk. They slid, folded, and split, their bodies shifting in rhythm with a sound like weeping metal. I awoke with blood from my nose and a taste of iron in my mouth. The symbols on the sand outside my tent were not there the night before. Harwood was not mad, or rather he was, but only because he saw the truth. The lights began to appear on the third night, glowing orbs at first mistaken for foxfire or swamp gas. But these moved with deliberate slowness, slithering across the distant buttes like serpents of plasma. They traced patterns in the air, repeating over hours, glyphs visible only from above. They watched me, not with eyes, but with intent. One orb separated from the rest and hovered near my camp, flickering as if in thought. The air grew electric and a sound like a child humming underwater filled my ears. I could not move, could not scream, could only watch as it lowered, drawing near my chest, not with heat, but with hunger. And then it spoke, not in words, but in a memory not my own, of skies filled with writhing shapes, of vast ruins beneath oceans long gone, and of minds that waited, trapped in dimensionless geometries until the stars returned to their places. I screamed then, but the light had already gone. The shack's chains were broken on the fifth night, not shattered, peeled like banana skins. The padlocks melted, the symbols on the wood blackened and bubbled as though burned from within. Inside I found no furniture, no food, no signs of life, only a spiral carved into the floor into which the light was sinking, not casting but flowing, pulled into the shape like water down a drain. The air reeked of sulfur and blood, and from beneath I heard chanting, not voices but the memory of voices, like echoes trapped in oil. The language was impossible, yet I understood. It spoke of the crawling choir, of the thought skin, and of the return. On the far wall, Harwood had painted, in dried blood and something that gleamed like mica, a sky turned inside out, from which beings like centipedes made of eyes spilled downward into a broken earth. In the bottom right corner, one phrase was scrawled again and again: "The sky is the door. The sky is the door. The sky is the door." I fled Terlingua. I do not know how far I ran, nor how many days passed, but I returned with the knowledge that the lights were not spirits nor visitors. They are the keepers. They were here before man walked upright, before this planet cooled, before time meant anything at all. They slither across the desert not to hunt, but to prepare, because the door is opening again. And some nights, if you stand in the right place in the desert and close your eyes, you'll see them too, gliding across the hills, lighting the sands beneath a moon that turns the color of blood. You'll hear the soft hum, feel the air twist, and taste metal at the back of your throat. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see the sky twitch, because it is not the heavens we gaze upon, it is the lid, and the thing beneath it is waking up. There are things in the dark not born of flesh or memory, but of dust, hunger, and time. I write these final pages not as a confession, nor even as a warning, for warnings are only useful when heeded. No, I write because I must, because what I have seen festers behind my eyelids each time I close them, and I fear that if I do not pass this horror into the world, it will rot me from the inside out. It begins, as these things often do, beneath a church. The Mission San Jose in San Antonio, built by Spanish friars in the 1700s, is revered as a symbol of persistence, a marvel of limestone and shadow. It stood through siege and starvation, through fire and decay. What few know What the archives of the Archdiocese do not acknowledge is that beneath it lies a network of tunnels, burrowed like veins through the bedrock. Local legend claims these passages were dug to shelter the missionaries from Comanche raids. But the truth, as always, is far more dreadful. In the fall of 1962, 5 graduate students from the University of Texas at Austin formed an amateur urban exploration group. Their aim was archaeological rather than sensationalist. Their leader, Paul Renteria, was writing his thesis on pre-Republic Spanish infrastructure. It was Paul who found the reference in a crumbling ledger housed at the university's archives, one written by a Spanish mason in 1791, whose final entry read, "We sealed the last gate. What crawled from the black hollows beyond was not man, nor beast, nor anything born of God's earth. We lost 2 more this week. The friars sing louder now. They think it cannot hear the hymns, but it hears." On October 11th, 1962, Paul led his team into an entrance beneath Mission San Jose. Of the 5 who descended into the tunnels, only one returned. His name was Daniel Hoyle, a reedy, nervous linguistics student with an affinity for dead languages. He was found wandering barefoot along South Presa Street 3 nights after their descent, his body covered in a fine black dust that irritated the skin and clung to the nostrils like ash from a burned church. His hair had gone white. His pupils were dilated to the size of dimes. He was naked except for the crucifix Paul had worn, a crude wooden piece snapped at the base and stained with something darker than rust. When brought to Bexar County Hospital, Daniel screamed until his voice cracked and his tongue bled. His only coherent utterance was recorded by Nurse Evelyn DeWitt. "They're not ghosts. They're still down there, waiting, hungry." He never spoke again. He died in 1974, catatonic and blind, having scratched thousands of symbols into the walls of his cell. No 2 were the same. None matched any known script except one, a spiral composed of jagged lines and angles that hurt to look at, the same one found carved into the subterranean stone in Harwood's shack, Interlingua. I should have left the matter alone. But like a fool, or perhaps like a man already touched by the thing beneath, I followed the trail drawn by a compulsion I now recognize as something implanted like a seed nestled behind the eyes. On November 3rd, 1978, I descended alone through a disused cellar beneath the mission, beneath the chapel itself. The entrance had been bricked over, but age and moisture had weakened the mortar. I chipped through, expecting rats or rot. What I found was a door of bone. At least, it looked like bone, bleached and yellowed, fused together by cartilage turned to stone. It opened with the sound of grinding teeth. I entered. The tunnels beyond were not carved by man. They spiraled in ways that defied the eye, leading down in strange ellipses where gravity seemed to tilt and stretch like melted wax. The air was dry, but each breath tasted of mold, iron, and the last breath of dying things. I saw carvings, murals etched into the walls with what I pray was charcoal. They depicted figures with hollow faces, their mouths wide open and filled with smaller mouths. They walked not upright but on all 4s, their arms longer than their legs, their torsos gaunt and segmented like centipedes. And always, always, they were listening. Somewhere far below I heard chanting, not words, not voices, but the memory of voices echoing up through the stone, dragging with it a sense of longing, starvation, and rage. It was then I realized I was no longer walking down. I was walking inward, into something. I found Paul, or what was left of him. A withered husk in the fetal position, fused to the stone, his flesh stretched thin as paper. His eyes had been plucked or grown over, impossible to tell which. His mouth was agape, and something moved inside it. Not maggots. Something slower, something aware. It blinked. I fled, but the path did not return the way I came. The spiral had turned. The chanting had grown louder. The walls were no longer stone, but organic, pulsing softly as if breathing in time with a sleeper's dreams. And behind me I heard footsteps, bare feet slapping gently against the damp earth. They followed not fast, not slow, just enough. I turned only once. There was a shape in the dark, thin, tall, head cocked sideways, with arms too long, fingers too many, and a mouth not on its face but on its chest, stretching across the torso like a wound. It whispered. The words were not words, but I understood. We were buried to starve, but flesh remembers, flesh returns. I awoke near the river. How I escaped, I do not know. My shoes were gone. My body was marked with long, shallow cuts in the shape of spirals. My tongue bore an unfamiliar sigil. For weeks I spoke in my sleep, sometimes in languages I never learned. I see them still, those symbols, sometimes on the backs of street signs, sometimes reflected in puddles. When I close my eyes, I still feel the air down there, still old, aware. Whatever the Spanish missionaries sealed beneath San Antonio was not ghost, nor demon, nor hallucination. It was hunger given form, and now it knows the way out.